Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sarah Harris. Sarah Harris is an intelligent and attractive young woman. She is energetic and kind. Her beauty even helped her win the Miss Maryland title during her school years. Sarah dreams of helping others and aims to build a career in the medical field, specifically as an anesthesiologist. In 2020, at the age of 20, she went to a private dental clinic and met Dr. James Ryan, a famous and respected dentist who has achieved great success in his profession and is a well-regarded figure in the medical community during her treatment. Sarah and James became close friends and kept in touch with each other. After completing her treatment, James invited her to work at the private clinic where she had been treated. She worked as an assistant, and over time, a romantic relationship developed between them. To outsiders, Sarah appeared charming and confident, but those who knew her well recognized her as a kind and friendly person. Unfortunately, this did not prevent the tragic turn of events that followed. On the morning of January 26, 2022, James called 911, reporting that his girlfriend had overdosed. During the call, he sounded panicked. He said that he had performed CPR, but Sarah's chest was not rising. When the police arrived, they found James crying and trying his best to resuscitate Sarah, who was lying on the floor and not breathing. There were no visible wounds or injuries on her body, and she was dead. Before the paramedics arrived, James assumed it was an overdose, but it was unclear whether it was accidental or intentional. The police began to piece together a timeline of events based on James's account on the evening of January 25, 2022. Sarah fell asleep on the living room sofa, which was not unusual for her that night while they were watching TV. Sarah reminded James that she had to work the next day and that it was time to go to bed. She lay down on the sofa while James went into the bedroom. When James woke up, he got up and went to check on Sarah. When he reached the living room, he found her lying on the floor and was horrified to realize that she was not breathing. He called emergency services and attempted to resuscitate her, but it was too late. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to save her. James admitted that he had put her on an IV to help her detox and had sought professionals to assist her in dealing with her addiction. He also revealed that he had caught her injecting herself on several occasions. James stated that Sarah suffered from bipolar disorder, which may have affected how she managed her mental health challenges. Sarah experienced frequent mood swings. She could feel very happy one moment and then suddenly start crying or become very angry and aggressive the next. On the morning of Sarah's death, James informed her family and shared the news with her mother. He relayed the details to the police, but her mother found it hard to believe what he said. She believed her daughter would not be addicted to illegal substances. During a search of the couple's home, police found several empty syringes, ligatures, and saline solution bags in the kitchen near the sink. Similar items were also found next to Sarah's body and in her room, along with several vials of medication that James had mentioned. Additionally, some of these items were discovered in her purse and closet. It appears that Sarah was a regular user of narcotics, however. Sarah's mother, Tina Harris, claimed that James had orchestrated the incident to make it appear as if it were an accidental overdose. At this point, Sarah and James had been dating for a year and a half. James was much older than Sarah, nearly twice her age, with over 20 years of private practice. James was a respected and well-known physician in the area from the beginning. Tina did not approve of her daughter dating an older man. She felt embarrassed by the large age gap, as James was old enough to be Sarah's father. Despite Tina's concerns, Sarah was determined to pursue the relationship, which Tina believed would be harmful to her daughter. Their relationship began in the summer of 2020. Shortly after Sarah scheduled a wisdom tooth appointment, James, the dentist, quickly took an interest in Sarah and asked for her phone number to stay in touch. After a few extractions, he began texting her to check in and see how she was doing. Sarah was initially distant, but Dr. James persisted. complimenting her and eventually getting her to respond more warmly. When James mentioned that he was looking for an assistant, he and Sarah were in daily contact. Tina had long suspected that James was trying to form a romantic relationship with her daughter. However, Tina did not think James posed any threat. He was a respected and decent man with a good reputation. James was divorced, had 3 grown children, and 1 child from one of his employees. He was wealthy and could provide for any woman. Many people considered him a charming man who liked to conquer beautiful women. Sarah then applied for a job, but James said he did not need one. The next day, he came to work to see her. Sarah dismissed her mother's concerns about their age difference, asserting that a romantic relationship with Dr. James was out of the question. She insisted that their interactions were purely business and friendly. Sarah believed that her mother, Tina, was being overly cautious. She thought that James's interest in her was purely professional and that they were not a couple. However, the following Christmas, he surprised Sarah with an expensive gift, a luxurious diamond ring. This action clearly went beyond the scope of their work and friendship. Later, Tina believed that James had sincere feelings for her daughter. Sarah promised her mother that she would be cautious and not become involved with a 47-year-old man. However, in early 2021, she agreed to go out to dinner with him. This led to a series of dates that suggested a developing romantic relationship. She often talked to her sisters and mother about James, even convincing Tina that he was a genuinely nice person. His resume was impressive, and he was generous. He gave Sarah a car when they started dating and paid for all their expenses. They traveled together, sometimes with Sarah's relatives, and even lived together. This made the family feel more comfortable and confident about James's serious intentions. Sarah was in regular contact with her loved ones. During this time, she shared only positive things about James, which allayed their suspicions. However, this happiness did not last long. The police spoke to Sarah's family and discovered that she had been going through a challenging period in her life. Her younger sister, Rachel, who is closest to her, reveals that Sarah is experiencing typical teenage problems. She had experimented with mild drugs, which eventually led to anxiety and depression starting around the age of 14. During this difficult time, Sarah experienced feelings of depression. However, she managed to complete her education and developed a deep interest in languages. She learned several languages, including sign language, but her mental health struggles made communication difficult. As a result, she only interacted with family and trusted friends. This continued at least until a music festival in 2018, where Sarah met a guy and his band who were performing at the event. They immediately felt a connection, which led to them starting to communicate. However, a significant problem arose because he lived an hour away from Sarah. They kept in touch via messaging apps, sharing their dreams of getting married and having children. Unfortunately, the distance caused their feelings to fade over time. They eventually drifted apart and decided to stay in touch as friends. He was the first to end their romantic relationship, but he confessed that he still had feelings for Sarah. He just felt that a long-distance relationship was unrealistic during this time. Sarah was actively involved in the modeling industry and participated in beauty pageants, eventually winning the title of Miss Maryland 2020 a year later. She met James in late summer 2021. Tina noticed that James had a huge influence on her daughter. He was her boss at work, her boyfriend at home, and Sarah even moved in with him. As a result, Sarah's behavior changed dramatically. Instead of growing, she seemed increasingly depressed. She eventually saw a psychiatrist who diagnosed her with bipolar disorder. During this time, she began to lose weight and her skin looked unhealthy. To help ease the situation, in September 2021, James, Sarah, and her mother planned a family trip to relax. During the trip, James, while drunk, shared a disturbing story with Tina. He revealed that he had seen Sarah when she was 14 years old. At that time, she was walking in the park with her friends and was noticed for her beauty. He knew where she worked at a toy store and often visited her with his children to admire her. Sarah often dressed up as different cartoon characters. But the time that impressed James the most was when she dressed up as Elsa. He later learned that Sarah had changed jobs and was now working part-time at a restaurant. From that point on, he often went to the restaurant for dinner. Hoping to see Sarah, Tina was surprised and thought that James was completely infatuated with her daughter. However, at that time, there was no evidence that James had any bad intentions towards Sarah. He seemed very loving, attentive, and caring. The situation changed during the next trip to Florida, which took place about a month later, despite the heat. Sarah wore a long-sleeved sweater, suggesting that she might be trying to hide something. She and James argued frequently. Sarah even confided in her mother that she no longer loved him, did not want to continue the relationship, and imagined breaking up with him. This worried her mother greatly after the family returned to Maryland. Disturbing incidents began to occur repeatedly. On October 28, 2021, Sarah called her mother, but Tina did not understand what her daughter was trying to say. Sarah spoke incoherently, making it difficult for her mother to grasp the message. Concerned, Tina went to Sarah's house with Rachel. What they discovered was alarming. Sarah had become so thin that they barely recognized her. The house was a disturbing sight, with needles and powder bags scattered across the floor, as well as syringes, ligatures, and bloody tissues everywhere. Tina took numerous photos of her daughter's living conditions and quickly blamed James for Sarah's condition. She tried to calm her mother down and convince her not to call the police. Tina agreed not to report the situation, only if Sarah returned home, where they could care for her for a few days. The family members noticed positive changes as her skin became healthier. She cooked and even went to church. However, it wasn't long before James convinced Sarah to return to him. On December 20, Sarah called her mother again, but mumbled something incomprehensible. Concerned, Tina went to James's house, where she discovered an even more alarming situation. There were numerous syringes and vials of various substances, as well as a tripod for IV drips. Frustrated by the chaos, Tina turned around and left without speaking to her daughter. A few days later, she met James, but did not listen to his explanations or excuses. Instead, she immediately punched him in the face, accusing him of giving Sarah illegal drugs. She dismissed his claim that he was actually trying to help her overcome her addiction. Tina warned James that if he did not break up with Sarah soon, she would have to contact the police. He said he would do this within a few days. However, Sarah did not return home even after 2 months. Tina was so upset that she considered taking her daughter by force and locking her in the house to keep her away from James and any drugs. When Tina shared this plan with Sarah, her daughter replied that if that happened, she would leave as soon as she got out and would never see her family again. This frightened Tina, and she decided not to carry out her plan. A few weeks later, tragedy struck the family when Sarah's brother suddenly died of a heart attack at the age of 38. Tina endured the traumatic experience of signing the documents to disconnect her son from life support. On January 26, 2022, at 8:30 a.m., James called Tina to inform her that Sarah had died of a drug overdose at the time of her death. Sarah weighed only 38 kilos. She contacted her ex-boyfriend 3 months before her death. In her messages, she sounded distressed, as if she were saying goodbye forever. After January 2022, Sarah stopped contacting him completely. Concerned for her well-being, Sarah's ex-lover decided to look up information about her and discovered that she had died. He immediately called her mother, Tina, to find out what had happened. After hearing about Sarah's death, her ex-lover was convinced that James was responsible. The police were planning to drop the case, and Sarah's family began to fight for justice. The fact that potent medical drugs were found at the scene of Sarah's death. The police trusted James, the reputable doctor, and did not secure the crime scene to collect evidence. It seemed that Sarah's family was facing significant challenges, but Sarah's sister, Rachel, was determined to find evidence of James's wrongdoing. She investigated Sarah's laptop, which the police had overlooked. Rachel was unsure of the exact password, but after a few days, she successfully remembered it because she was familiar with her sister's habits. Rachel discovered numerous text messages exchanged between James and Sarah, some of which referred to drugs, including sedatives and 2 fast-acting surgical anesthetics. There was also information about less potent substances that Sarah appeared to have used. Rachel took numerous photographs of the house where her sister lived with James, along with documents that their mother had previously collected. In total, the correspondence amounted to approximately 200 pages of printed evidence. All of the drugs were listed in the coroner's autopsy report. It was known that these substances were addictive, caused difficulty in breathing in, and that their combined use could be fatal without medical supervision. However, since the case was considered an accident, the dosage found in Sarah's body was not recorded. In February 2022, the documents were turned over to the police. Through messages found on Sarah's laptop, they were able to piece together the events leading up to her death, which occurred about a month after she began dating James. Sarah had mentioned struggling with mental health issues and constant anxiety. Initially, James suggested an injection that would quickly relieve her symptoms. However, over the following months, Sarah became severely addicted to the drug. The messages show that she not only asked James to bring her illegal drugs, but also sought to obtain them without his permission. During this time, she also asked James to give her an injection of drugs. They discussed painkillers in October 2021, syringes in November, and by December, she was simply asking for something to help her sleep, which required a strong anesthetic injection. It seemed all she had to do was call James, and he would bring home the necessary medical supplies. Sarah began regular painkiller injections in December 2021, and the last text message mentioning the drug was sent just a day before her death, according to the police handling Sarah's case. The initial investigation was ineffective because officers were not equipped to address the medical aspects of the situation in James's home. There were multiple ampules of medication and liquids that the police considered non-lethal, especially since they were handled by medically trained individuals who knew what they were doing. This caused confusion on March 22, 2022, nearly 2 months after Sarah's death. James was arrested for murder from the start. The case posed challenges for the prosecution due to the lack of direct evidence. Relying instead on circumstantial evidence and text messages exchanged between the couple, James's defense argued that he was trying to save Sarah's life, not end it. With this background, they could have proven that he had committed manslaughter. However, the case faced significant obstacles, making the chances of success slim. As a result, prosecutors decided to charge James with second-degree murder, aiming to prove that he was aware of the potential danger his actions posed. Rather than proving that he intended to kill, this approach seemed more reasonable because James would have been aware of the risks involved in administering these substances to Sarah. Additionally, James faced charges in 2 cases involving the distribution and possession of illegal drugs with intent to distribute. The prosecution aimed to portray James as a domineering husband who tried to control Sarah through drugs. A significant portion of the prosecution's evidence was based on text messages exchanged between James and Sarah, which were found by Rachel. Lawyers argued that Sarah had mental health issues that may have played a role in her death. Shortly before her death, she wrote to her ex-boyfriend, expressing that she had lost all interest in life. There were signs that she not only sought out drugs, but also began stealing them, which left James unable to effectively manage her addiction. James was unable to monitor her constantly, and she eventually took advantage of his absence at night to use drugs, which created a dangerous combination. James claimed that he was trying to protect her and manage her addiction while also seeking a solution to the problem. Unfortunately, he ran out of time before she overdosed James's lawyer highlighted several errors made during the initial investigation. The police failed to collect all of the medical supplies and items for fingerprint testing. The defense argued that Sarah had long struggled with addiction and that several witnesses had seen her injecting herself with suspicious drugs. However, correspondence showed that James had introduced her to drugs and had regularly injected her. Ultimately, on August 25, 2023, the jury deliberated and found James Ryan guilty of second-degree murder and other charges. At the subsequent hearing, where the final verdict was announced, James's attorney presented testimony from patients, co-workers, and acquaintances who believed James was innocent. Despite this support, the court sentenced James to 45 years in prison. The case of Natasha Cournoyer. Natasha Cournoyer, a 37-year-old woman, disappeared mysteriously. She didn't visit her mother, didn't answer phone calls, and wasn't at home. Her friends and colleagues didn't see her that day either. By 5 p.m., her relatives reported her missing, and the police launched an investigation. As a public relations specialist, Natasha worked for the Correctional Service of Canada. The detectives started by visiting her workplace to interview her colleagues. They discovered Natasha's car still parked nearby, with a man named Michel Trottier lingering around it. Appearing nervous, Trottier claimed to have a romantic relationship with Natasha and was trying to figure out where she might have gone. Scratches were found on the back door of Natasha's car, but it was unclear whether they were related to her disappearance or had existed before. The detectives didn't find any reason to suspect Trottier's involvement in Natasha's disappearance. After conducting interviews with Natasha's co-workers, investigators learned that she was at work on October 1, 2009, the day before she vanished. Her colleagues reported that her behavior that day was completely normal. She was in a good mood and interacted with them in a friendly manner, as she always did. Natasha had scheduled a day off for October 2nd to take care of some personal business related to her father's recent passing. She needed to finalize arrangements for his tombstone. As a result, she stayed at the office longer than usual on October 1st, ultimately leaving the building around 8 p.m. Natasha's friends portrayed her as a kind and open person who didn't have any conflicts or enemies. She worked in an office environment and didn't have any involvement with prisoners, making it hard to imagine anyone holding a grudge against her. The police launched a massive search operation to locate Natasha Cournoyer, deploying both air and canine units. They scoured the area surrounding the parking lot, but unfortunately did not uncover any leads that could aid the investigation. Meanwhile, Natasha's friends and family distributed flyers featuring her photo, hoping that someone might have information about her disappearance or have seen her. The initial hours following a person's disappearance are crucial, as this is when witnesses or evidence are most likely to be found. However, in Natasha's case, valuable time was lost because the police didn't receive the report until the evening of October 2nd, a full 21 hours after she had left her workplace. Natasha's family offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could help locate her. Michel Trottier, Natasha's boyfriend, suspected she had been kidnapped and made a televised plea to her possible abductor, asking them to release her. Meanwhile, the police investigated Michelle and Natasha's personal lives, discovering that they had been in a troubled on-again, off-again relationship for 4 years. The police explored all possible scenarios behind Natasha's disappearance. After reviewing CCTV footage, the police were able to piece together Natasha's final day at work. She arrived at the building at 9:04 a.m. and left at 8:07 p.m., heading towards her parked car in a poorly lit area of the parking lot. At some point, Natasha vanished into the darkness. A few minutes later, the car's headlights turned on, and the vehicle began moving in the opposite direction of the exit. It stopped in another poorly lit area, and the headlights went out. The car remained there for about 20 minutes before moving towards the exit. However, it was not Natasha's Mazda. It was determined from other records that a Ford Windstar minivan appeared on the video. Further investigation revealed that this vehicle entered the parking lot at 6:35 p.m. and parked beside Natasha's car. Based on the video evidence, the police suspected that Natasha Cournoyer's disappearance was likely a kidnapping. By the fifth day of the search, on October 6, 2009, the investigation shifted from a missing person case to a homicide. Natasha's body was discovered in a vacant lot in the Pointe-aux-Trembles area, approximately 20 miles from her workplace. The body was found adjacent to a dirt road leading to the riverbank. Natasha's death sent shockwaves through her family and friends. The details of the medical examiner's report only made things worse. The cause of death was strangulation, but that was only the final act. Before that, she had been punched in the face 9 times, breaking her nose. Her wrists and ankles bore marks, indicating she had been restrained at some point. The presence of seminal fluid provided a DNA sample. As the detectives waited for the DNA analysis results, they focused on identifying the owner of the minivan seen on the day Natasha vanished. In 2009, 2 motels operated near her workplace. 10 days after the body was discovered, on October 16, 2009, police visited both motels, reviewing the guest registration cards. At the Lido Motel, they found a guest who had listed a Ford Windstar as his vehicle on the day Natasha Cournoyer went missing. The man was identified as 48-year-old Claude LaRouche, a registered sex offender with a criminal history. He had served 2 prison sentences, 1 year in prison plus 2 years of probation in 1993 for forcing a 19-year-old acquaintance into sexual intercourse, and 40 months in prison in 2005 for attempting to kidnap a 7-year-old girl who managed to escape his grasp and run to a neighbor's house. By November 2008, LaRouche was out of prison. He started working as a carpenter and got married to a woman with 2 sons in 2009. The family lived together in a house just a 10-minute drive from the parking lot where Natasha Cournoyer went missing. In their investigation, detectives found that LaRouche had checked into a motel on the night Natasha disappeared. They called in forensic experts to examine the motel room, where they discovered dark red stains on the carpet that had been poorly cleaned. The stains were sent for analysis. On the same day, detectives visited LaRouche's residence to question him. Since he had a prior criminal record, his DNA was already on file with the police. However, they needed time to compare it with the DNA evidence collected from Natasha's body. LaRouche claimed he didn't know Natasha Cournoyer, but admitted to frequenting the Lido Motel due to its affordability. He stated that he was unhappy with his marital life and would often rent a room at the motel to engage in paid sexual services. When asked about his whereabouts on October 1st, the day Natasha went missing, LaRouche said he had no recollection, including whether he had stayed at the Lido Motel that day. He attributed this memory gap to excessive drug use, but his memory suddenly returned a month later, on November 5, 2009. After the detectives revisited LaRouche, the DNA analysis revealed that the seminal fluid found on Natasha Cournoyer's body belonged to him. Furthermore, Natasha's DNA was discovered in the motel room he rented and inside his car. According to the Montreal police, there was no connection between the crime and Cournoyer's job as a communications officer for the Correctional Service of Canada, and the victim did not know the suspect. LaRouche's neighbors were shocked and disturbed by his arrest, describing him as a friendly and polite person. On November 6, 2009, Claude LaRouche was identified as a suspect in the disappearance and suspected murder of Natasha Cournoyer. Initially, he denied any involvement or wrongdoing, but later, faced with overwhelming evidence, he confessed to taking Natasha's life. However, he claimed that her death was unintentional and accidental. During the 2011 trial, 2 conflicting versions of events emerged, one from Claude LaRouche and his lawyers, and another from the prosecutor. According to LaRouche's testimony, he was waiting for a drug dealer in a parking lot when Natasha appeared beside him. LaRouche claimed that he attacked Natasha, forced her into his car, and drove to a motel where Natasha supposedly offered to comply with his demands in exchange for her freedom. Conveniently, LaRouche said he experienced memory lapses, remembering only the details that supported his innocence. LaRouche's account continued, stating that a dispute broke out in the motel room, causing him to lose control and attack Natasha, eventually strangling her. Afterwards, he cleaned the room, placed Natasha's body in his car, drove home, and went to bed. The next morning, when the effects of the drugs he had taken wore off, LaRouche realized the severity of his actions and decided to dispose of the body. He shredded Natasha's documents and bank cards, throwing them out of his car window while driving to the location where her body was eventually found. To clarify, this is Claude LaRouche's version of events, which raised many doubts as he continued to speak. According to LaRouche, he returned to the body the day after disposing of it, covering it with a blanket because he feared Natasha might freeze. The following day, he went back to retrieve the blanket, allegedly because he was concerned that the blanket would delay the discovery of Natasha's body. In summary, Claude LaRouche's account of events is plagued by inconsistencies and illogical actions, which were likely caused by his impaired mental state. Notably, LaRouche repeatedly emphasized during the trial that he never intended to harm Natasha. The prosecution built a strong case based on material evidence, which was corroborated by a key eyewitness. This witness testified that he was walking his dog near the parking lot on the day Natasha Cournoyer disappeared. He claimed to have seen Claude LaRouche attempting to attack a jogger, but LaRouche fled the scene when he noticed the witness and his dog. This incident occurred around 7 p.m., approximately an hour before Natasha Cournoyer was attacked. According to the prosecutor, LaRouche tied Natasha up and forcibly took her to a motel where she was eventually killed. In June 2011, the court found Claude LaRouche guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. During the trial, it was revealed that Claude LaRouche had attempted to strangle another woman, Dominique Martel, just 2 weeks after attacking Natasha Cournoyer. Martel defended herself by biting his finger, managing to fight him off. As a result, LaRouche was classified as a dangerous criminal under Canadian law, implying he will likely remain incarcerated indefinitely with little chance of early release. Natasha led a happy, quiet life filled with dreams and ambitions. However, her life was tragically cut short by a man with a history of serious crimes who was free to roam among the public despite his record. Her family and friends cannot help but wonder how an individual who had previously attempted to kidnap a 7-year-old girl was allowed to walk free. They question why no one was monitoring him. If the system had functioned differently and LaRouche had been imprisoned as he should have been, Natasha might still be alive today. The case of Kathy Lamb. Kathy Lamb lived in an affluent area of Palm Beach. Kathy had a challenging childhood. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she lived with her father. During her teenage years, her mother was absent, which took a significant emotional toll on her. She was self-conscious about her weight, feeling larger than her peers. Fortunately, her stepmother was kind and supportive. Recognizing Kathy's insecurities, she helped her build her confidence, and over time, Kathy became more confident. She started playing sports and trying to lose weight. Kathy was very smart and kind, which helped her make friends in high school. She was active and cheerful, and her problems seemed to disappear when she was with her friends. One of those friends was Jeff. They met when he was 17 and she was 16, and they quickly felt a special connection. Their relationship continued even after they graduated. 2 years later, they secretly married, surprising their families. When their parents found out, they thought the couple was too young to make such a serious decision, but the couple was determined to stay together, despite family pressure. It seemed like the newlyweds had a bright future ahead of them. Jeff worked hard at a local repossessed car park, while Kathy found work as a pharmacist at a pharmacy. She had the necessary education and wanted to advance in the field. Over the years, Jeff remained a tow truck driver, while Kathy became a top pharmacist. A year later, she was offered a job as a district planner for distributing drugs to pharmacies, an opportunity she eagerly accepted. They achieved their dream of owning a home and enjoyed 12 happy years there until a devastating tragedy occurred. On June 15, 2004, Jeff returned home from work at around 7 p.m. He intended to invite his wife to dinner. However, as soon as he entered, he was horrified to see blood all over the hallway, running down the walls. The gruesome evidence of blood splatter and brain matter terrified him. As he called 911, he struggled to speak and held back tears. Initially, the operator mistook his cries for those of a woman, but Jeff eventually plucked up the courage to describe his home, which now looked like the set of a horror movie. At the end of the corridor, there was a significant amount of blood on one wall, as if it had been splattered. Facing this wall, about 1.5 meters away, similar splatters were visible on the opposite wall, and they extended down the stairs leading to the second floor. On the upper level, in the midst of the gruesome scene, lay 30-year-old Kathy, who was unresponsive. The operator attempted to guide Jeff over the phone to provide first aid, but Kathy's injuries were so severe that there was nothing that could be done. When the police arrived, they were taken aback by the horrific sight. It was one of the most brutal crime scenes they had ever encountered. Kathy's body showed multiple severe head injuries from heavy objects. Her skull and face were so badly damaged that they appeared completely disfigured. Although the murder weapon was not found at the scene, a thorough laboratory analysis determined that it was likely a long, heavy object with a hexagonal shape or similar features. Jeff mentioned that he had tried to call his wife several times after 5 p.m. but received no answer, which he found unusual. Concerned, he rushed home to meet her. It turned out that not only Kathy was injured, the couple had 3 large dogs in the house, Jeff's dog and his wife's 2 dogs. Tragically, both of his wife's pets were discovered badly beaten and lying on the floor next to their deceased owner. They had suffered severe head injuries and were barely alive. Unfortunately, the injuries were so extensive that the veterinarians had to euthanize the dogs to relieve their suffering. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff's dog was found locked in his owner's bedroom. Paws from all 3 dogs were found at the scene, along with blood that police believe did not come from the animals. They suspect the blood may have come from a struggle with the killer. The blood has been sent for analysis to determine its source and whether it can help the investigation, and they await the results. Police are uncertain whether the blood on the dogs came from Kathy or whether they fought with the attacker to protect her, resulting in their fatal injuries. Police found the dogs unharmed after the woman had been killed and the fight had begun. The amount of blood on the animals suggests that they had seriously injured the attacker, possibly lacerating an arm or leg. This means that the attacker would have bled profusely, possibly from an open wound, and that he would have sought medical attention at a hospital. The attacker's intentions remain unclear. He may have acted recklessly or out of a deep hatred for his victim, ignoring the large dogs that lived with the family. After examining the crime scene, the police still lacked any concrete leads. They had to wait for the autopsy results to gather more information. In the meantime, they checked all the local hospitals for the injured attacker. Several suspicious people came in with injuries that were found to be unrelated to the incident, as their injuries did not match those of a dog bite. The police began talking to local residents in the hope that someone had seen suspicious activity at Kathy's home or had noticed the criminal fleeing, possibly injured. Unfortunately, no one observed anything unusual. They were also trying to find a motive. Robbery seemed unlikely given the many valuables in the family's home. Only the gold earrings with diamonds that the Kathy was wearing during the attack were missing, while everything else remained untouched. Even the money, which was clearly visible, was not taken. It seems unlikely that a robber would ignore such an opportunity. There were no indications of a break-in, the furniture was undisturbed, drawers were not opened, and belongings were not scattered about, as thieves typically do when they search for valuables. This led the police to explore alternative motives and various theories. The forensic expert determined that the murder occurred between 4:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. Jeff, the first suspect who found the scene, had a strong alibi. At that time, he was on the job and was seen by numerous co-workers. Additionally, he showed no signs of injuries that would typically result from a struggle with the dogs. Just as police were about to clear Jeff of suspicion, an unknown young woman arrived at the family home. Joy Steele came to the house and introduced herself as Jeff's fiancée, which surprised the police, especially since Jeff had been crying earlier. The police found this an interesting case, as a man who had just lost his wife was being comforted by his mistress, with whom he had been in a serious relationship for a long time. This revelation made the case seem even more suspicious. 7 years into their relationship, Kathy discovered Jeff's infidelity. Despite this, they remained together and did not divorce. Kathy forgave him and even encouraged him to end the affair, leading to their reconciliation and continued life together just before the tragic incident. Police are considering whether a love triangle may have been a motive for the crime. Jeff had a strong motive for killing his troubled wife. That doesn't necessarily mean Jeff killed Kathy himself. He may have convinced someone else to do it. The police discovered a third dog locked in one of the rooms, which was unharmed. This was peculiar, especially given the serious injuries of the other 2 dogs belonging to the Kathy. Did the criminal truly hate her to the extent that he chose to ruin everything she cherished? The police needed to find answers to these questions. In the meantime, one of the police was questioning Jeff's mistress, Joy Steele, at the location of the incident. Joy shared her and Jeff's future plans. They planned to move away after a while Jeff planned to quit his job. Joy had a solid alibi. Joy, who was apparently working at a restaurant during the time of the murder, was present, and multiple people could confirm this. In addition, Joy had no injuries on her body. Although the suspicious couple could not have been directly involved in the murder due to their alibis and their lack of injuries, the police have not ruled them out as suspects given the serious circumstances surrounding the crime. They had a strong motive for their plan. The investigation into the crime and the hiring of the killer continues, with the police focusing on identifying potential enemies or those who may have wanted to harm Kathy. However, Kathy's friends and relatives have been unable to identify any enemies, with the exception of her husband. That same day, another suspect emerged. Jeff had another mistress named Lisa. A few weeks before the murder, Lisa's husband, Ray, discovered them together when he came home early from work and found Jeff shirtless on the couch. This confrontation led Ray to kick Jeff out of the house. The next day, Ray calls Lisa and threatens to kill Jeff if he continues with Lisa. Ray emerged as a potential suspect due to his violent nature and apparent motive. However, the situation raised questions about the Kathy. Why did Ray kill Jeff's wife? She had not harmed him and was actually the victim in the scenario, just like Ray. Despite this, Jeff continued to blame Ray. He believed that Ray had gone to the house to carry out his threat against Jeff, but Jeff was not home at the time. It is also possible that upon arriving at Jeff's house, Ray was in danger from Jeff's wife and dogs, so Ray felt compelled to kill her and the dogs. However, this motive does not fit with the extreme violence the killer showed towards Kathy. Her injuries were extremely brutal, suggesting that this was not a random crime, but an act of deep hatred. The police then turned their attention to Lisa, the second lover. Despite her husband's threats, she remained in contact with Jeff. Cell phone records confirmed that they frequently called and texted each other, including at the time of the Kathy's murder. Lisa and her husband Ray were both investigated, but they had solid alibis and were eliminated as suspects. However, the police decided to track the geolocation data of the lovers' mobile devices to gain more details. The call between Lisa and Jeff took place just minutes after the murder. Jeff's cell phone was found near his home, and Jeff was not at work at the time, contrary to what he had previously said. Additionally, Jeff's dog was unharmed, which seems more than just a coincidence. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination of the animals. They collected DNA samples from the dog's muzzle and paws. Notably, the stains found on Jeff's dog were identified as palm prints. Blood samples taken from the scene were confirmed to belong to the Kathy, indicating that the perpetrator was in the hall with the dog after the attack on Kathy, during which she was injured or possibly killed. Police suspected that the killer's DNA might be on the animal's muzzles and paws. However, the investigation disproved this theory, revealing that the blood was not human, but believed to be from dogs that may have been fighting each other. By analyzing all the new information, police were able to piece together a clearer picture of the events that occurred on that tragic day. Someone entered the house and discovered Kathy along with her 3 large dogs. The attacker hit the woman in the head with a heavy object. 2 dogs were present, also seriously injured and later died. And they did not attack the attacker. They endured the blows without defending themselves. The 3rd dog also did not confront the attacker. Instead, the 3rd dog focused on protecting the other 2 dogs. This behavior aroused suspicion. The police consulted dog handlers for insights. Experts suggested that the dog's lack of resistance indicated they were familiar with the attacker and viewed him as a friend. This familiarity explained why they did not confront him but instead appeared to bite each other. Police found bite marks on the dogs, leading them to conclude that only Jeff, the owner of the surviving dog, could have attacked Kathy. Additionally, geolocation data indicated that the Jeff was near the house, which supported their suspicions. However, the Supreme Court only had circumstantial evidence, meaning they still had a long way to go before bringing any charges. The police needed one crucial piece of information to strengthen their case. With no further clues, the police focused on investigating Jeff's personal life to understand what might have motivated Jeff to kill his wife. It turned out that the family had recently faced significant financial difficulties, which had affected Jeff for many years before these events. Jeff's boss caught him stealing a large sum of money, about $30,000. Jeff had not spent it all and agreed to return it. He also paid his boss $20,000 in restitution. The police then analyzed Jeff's activities. It turned out that his job brought in only a small income, just enough for his family's needs. He also spent money on his mistress. His wife's income was much higher, but he did not want to tell her about his problems. Jeff was characterized as someone without any remarkable business skills. He was neither particularly foolish nor exceptionally intelligent. His earnings were limited, making the compensation amount a serious financial burden for him. Despite living in an affluent neighborhood, he struggled to come up with the funds. Jeff sought ways to earn extra money or secure a loan, but all these efforts proved fruitless, and the total amount of compensation remained far beyond his reach. He later learned that he was the sole beneficiary of Kathy's life insurance policy, which was worth $29,000. Police believed that this amount of money could solve all of Jeff's financial problems. On the day of the incident, police collected the clothes he was wearing at the time. However, forensic experts conducted a quick test and found no blood or DNA from Kathy on his clothes. The suspect was wearing dark clothing, making it difficult to detect any blood stains. The experts meticulously studied every millimeter of the items using a microscope with 60,000 times magnification. Inside the jeans, they discovered several small red drops, which the forensic team identified as blood. This blood had seeped deep into the fabric fibers, suggesting that it was from high-velocity splashes. This evidence was consistent with the nature of the injuries sustained by the Kathy. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Kathy. The police were further surprised when they examined the Jeff's other belongings. They found a gold earring embedded with a diamond in one of his trouser pockets, which he had claimed was stolen during an attack. This indicated that he likely staged the scene and hesitated to dispose of the item to avoid being caught at a pawn shop. To strengthen their case in court, the police needed to find the murder weapon. Despite their best efforts, the police were unable to find the weapon. It took the prosecutor's office 2 months to establish a clear connection between the killer and the victim. During this time, an employee of the company where Jeff worked discovered a hexagonal crowbar on the roof of the building. The tool was standard equipment on the company's tow trucks and was available to all employees. What made the crowbar suspicious was the significant amount of blood found on it. The employee promptly notified the police of the discovery. Jeff claimed that he had lost his crowbar and was unable to provide it to the police. This raised suspicions that the bloody crowbar belonged to him and may have been hidden as the murder weapon. The crowbar was sent to a laboratory, where experts compared it to the injuries found on Kathy's head. They concluded that the shape of the tool matched the impact marks. Additionally, the blood found on the crowbar was confirmed to be Kathy's through analysis. Jeff was arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Friends knew he had often complained about his troubled marriage. He claimed that Kathy couldn't manage household chores, which made him angry. However, he overlooked that she was the one supporting the family financially and covering their travel expenses, leaving her little time for housework. Jeff's car was always cluttered with garbage, yet he continued to blame Kathy. He frequently talked to friends about wanting to end their relationship, and several acquaintances reported that he was considering divorce. Kathy was unhappy in her marriage to Jeff due to his betrayals and chaotic lifestyle, which she knew about. She often vented her frustrations to friends but couldn't bring herself to leave him because she loved him deeply. Despite her unhappiness, she stayed with Jeff, trying to tolerate his behavior. For Jeff, murder seemed like a better option than going through a divorce. He was in dire financial straits after stealing $30,000 at work, which had severely impacted his finances. If he divorced Kathy, they would have to divide their assets, and he risked losing their home. He felt he had nothing left to lose, as a divorce would leave him with little since Kathy could claim most of their assets. Jeff figured that by committing murder, he could use the life insurance payout to pay off his debts, keeping part of the money to start a new life with his mistress. Jeff had promised to make a choice between his 2 girlfriends, Lisa and Joy, but the decision remained a secret. During the investigation, police uncovered more details about the crime. On the day it happened, Jeff left for work but had actually planned to kill his wife. He drove a tow truck to a gas station, pretending he needed to fill it up. His absence from work was noted, and during that time, he returned home to wait for his wife to return. He was familiar with her daily routine, so he did not have to wait long. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff brutally killed his wife's dogs with a crowbar. The dogs, confused and frightened, began to fight. To stop the chaos, Jeff hit each dog on the head and then took his pet, Netarunu, into a room and locked the door. After the incident, he removed his wife's diamond earrings, intending to make it look like a robbery. He discarded some of his clothes, taking off his shirt and shoes, but he kept the jeans he wore during the massacre, likely overlooking the bloodstains on them. This oversight allowed forensic experts to find tiny drops of blood on the jeans, linking him to the crime. His lover called him while he was near his home, which revealed his location on the phone. When he arrived at the station, he attempted to dispose of the crowbar used in the attack, but did so carelessly, simply throwing it onto the roof of a utility building and not washing it. He believed the tool would never be discovered. Jeff was convicted of premeditated murder due to financial difficulties he thought he could overcome by collecting life insurance from his wife's death. Prosecutors presented substantial evidence linking him to the crime scene, the murder weapon, and the victim. His fingerprints were found on the crowbar, along with Kathy's blood on his clothing. He had attempted to stage a robbery and failed to completely conceal the earrings that were believed to have been stolen. Several people testified about domestic problems. Kathy still hoped to reconcile with her husband, despite being devastated by his betrayal. She truly loved him and was undaunted by his financial difficulties. What she craved most was love and understanding. Unfortunately, Jeff did not want to rekindle their relationship. Instead, he planned a murder that he believed would net him $29,000. It is suspected that Joy, one of Jeff's lovers, knew of his intentions. Jeff promised her a future together on the condition that she pay off the debt he would incur from his crimes. During the hearing, the defense attempted to portray Jeff as a model husband and a good person, but no witness could reliably substantiate this claim. Jeff had never been a hard worker and showed little interest in his work. He had no motivation to do anything else and did not have a positive reputation in his family life. He was not a good husband, as he had a history of infidelity that his late wife knew about. His lifestyle was well known to friends and family. But it was his wife who suffered the most. When Jeff's efforts to build a better image failed, his attorney changed tactics. He began looking for weaknesses in the prosecution's case. However, the prosecution's strategy was well rehearsed and backed by substantial evidence, leaving little room for debate. The defense argued that Jeff was not the only possible suspect in Kathy's murder, claiming that the police had focused too quickly on him without fully exploring other potential suspects. In fact, police and the prosecutor's office had interviewed dozens of people and considered multiple suspects. Each suspect was thoroughly questioned, allowing police to eliminate those who did not fit the evidence. The prosecution argued that the attacker had two motives. First, he hoped to solve his financial problems through a life insurance policy. Second, he wanted to get rid of his troubled wife so he could live with one of his mistresses. Additionally, he sought to avoid the risk of losing his assets or having to divide his assets in a divorce. The prosecution also argued that Jeff's mistress, Lisa, knew about his plans. She supported him and was waiting for the call to hear about the progress of the crime. Her indiscretion led her to call Jeff, which provided the police with a vital clue. Investigations were conducted to determine whether the mistresses were involved in planning or organizing the crime, but the results were negative. However, it is clear that they supported the Jeff, even though they should have reported his bad intentions to the police to prevent the murder. Ultimately, no evidence was found to prove the lovers' guilt or involvement, so they faced no consequences in court. In September 2006, Jeff Lamb was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life without parole. As the verdict was read, Lisa wept uncontrollably in court. Kathy's family believes the court's ruling was fair. In Kathy's mother's opinion, Jeff should rot behind bars for the rest of his life. The case of Jasmine Richardson. The Richardson family was widely admired for their friendly and hospitable personalities, which made everyone feel at home. Deborah, Mark, and their children, Tyler and Jasmine, lived in a cozy home. Their home is frequented by friends, and the family atmosphere is built on the principles of love and respect. However, things took a turn when Jasmine, their 12-year-old daughter, entered puberty. From a calm and obedient girl, she grew into a confident but also impulsive young woman. This new personality led to frequent conflicts with her parents, and her academic performance started to decline. Jasmine's interests changed in a big way. She switched from listening to modern pop music to heavy rock. In addition, her fashion style is no longer the same as before. Gone were the bright colors and cheerful clothing. Instead, she opted for a darker, more somber style that was often provocative. It was clear that Jasmine was trying to attract the attention of boys, and she began to accentuate the curves of her body. Her interaction with friends noticeably decreased as she began spending more time alone in her room, often with the door closed, glued to her computer screen. After the internet became available at home, her interests shifted to exploring Gothic themes, reading dark poetry, learning about criminal psychology, and studying human anatomy. She also became fascinated with criminal psychology and the Wiccan religion, referring to herself as a witch. She connected with like-minded individuals through websites focused on similar interests, forming a community of friends who shared her passions. Her social media page featured the greeting, "Welcome to my tragic world." Jasmine's behavior, initially thought to be a sign of puberty, but late became more concerning as she began to distance herself from her family. She created a fictional online persona, gave herself a different name, age, and began seeking relationships with people much older than her. Her parents tried their best to support her during this difficult period, suggesting that they spend time together by participating in common activities. However, Jasmine found these suggestions uninteresting. Her relationship with her younger brother deteriorated as she started speaking to him less frequently, viewing him as an annoyance. In stark contrast, she spends hours talking to strangers on social media, building other relationships, to make up for her lackluster relationships with family and friends. Deborah and Mark were aware that their daughter's new hobbies were likely a temporary phase of her youth. As a result, they were patient and allowed her to explore her interests. When Jasmine asked to attend a punk rock concert, her parents agreed. If only they had known the consequences that would follow this outing. In early 2006, Jasmine attended a local concert by a youth band that shared her interests. She also knew that Jeremy Steinke, a boy who had caught her attention for months, would be there. They had met online through a website for vampire enthusiasts and occasionally communicated with each other. Jeremy created an online persona as a 30-year-old werewolf who craved blood. To support this claim, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, but the origin of the fluid was unknown. Despite his ambiguity, he seems to believe he is unique, a quality Jasmine finds appealing and interesting. Jeremy and Jasmine connection deepened after meeting at a concert. Jeremy, however, was 23 years old, and the duo knew her parents would not approve of their relationship due to their significant age difference. As a result, they decided to keep their romance a secret. Complications in Jeremy's life were made worse by problems he had experienced earlier. He struggled financially and resided in a trailer with his mother and sister. His relationship with his mother was strained, largely because of her heavy drinking. This often led to violent arguments with some of her hot-tempered partners, who often abused Jeremy in drunken fits. By the age of 13, Jeremy was struggling academically and had mental health issues due to a troubled home life. He became so overwhelmed that he tried to hang himself, but fortunately, someone intervened in time. He was later diagnosed with depression and hyperactivity. Due to the relentless bullying he faced at school, Jeremy decided to stop attending. As Jeremy navigated the dark period of his life, he developed a passion for the concept of live immortally and began exploring online forums, where like-minded people shared thoughts and ideas. His online profile was filled with morbid topics, including self-harm, pain, and violence. Unbeknownst to their families, Jeremy had started a dating relationship with Jasmine. Their friends were aware of the relationship, but they found it strange due to the large age gap. Everything remained a secret until Jasmine's parents, Deborah and Mark, discovered her excessive internet use and decided to monitor her online activity. What they found alarmed them. Jasmine was in contact with strangers, including Jeremy. He is someone with a suspicious online identity. His nickname, Soul Eater, and interests in dark themes raised concerns, leading Jasmine's parents to intervene and restrict her access to the computer. They were shocked to learn that Jasmine was in a dating relationship with Jeremy, making it clear to them that this relationship was not acceptable under any circumstances. Deborah and Mark took their daughter Jasmine to see a psychologist, hoping she would get the help she needed to escape her toxic relationship. The counseling sessions greatly improved their parent-child relationship, and Jasmine appeared to be returning to a normal life, claiming the past was behind her. She regained access to her computer. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a wrong decision and proved fatal for Jasmine's family. On the evening of Saturday, April 22, 2006, as the family prepared for bed, Deborah heard a noise in the basement and went to investigate. She initially thought the noise might be rats, but discovered a person wearing a ski mask instead. The masked man stood opposite Deborah, and her first reaction was to scream. The stranger attempted to silence her by covering her mouth, but was unsuccessful, prompting Deborah to scream even louder. The assailant then stabbed Deborah in the chest with a knife, twice. Mark, hearing his wife's desperate cries for help, rushed down to the basement. He was met with a horrific scene. His wife lay in a pool of blood, with the attacker standing nearby. Mark quickly responded by attacking the intruder. However, he was stabbed in the stomach and sustained additional stab wounds. As Mark's pain began to subside and he was losing consciousness, he quietly asked the attacker why he did that. The attacker coldly replied that it was because Mark's daughter had wanted it that way. Upstairs, Tyler was left alone and scared as the attacker approached. Tyler was still in his pajamas and was paralyzed with fear. The footsteps grew louder and the bedroom door opened. Just a few days before the murder, Jasmine was happy since her parents had forgiven her, allowing her to reconnect with them. Mobile phones weren't widely used at that time, so Jasmine used the computer to communicate with the outside world. As soon as she regained internet access, she immediately contacted Jeremy. She told Jeremy, "Everyone will think you and I are crazy, but there's one way we can be together, if my parents disappear." However, what Jasmine didn't reveal to her parents was that she was secretly forming a plan to kill them while she was receiving therapy sessions. She shared this plan with Jeremy. He found the idea appealing, but he stressed that everything needed to be carefully, meticulously planned and that attention to detail was required. Jasmine realized that as long as her parents were alive, she would never be able to be with Jeremy. During this time, Jasmine's friends noticed that she often complained about her parents, expressing her annoyance towards them. What they don't realize is that Jasmine's resentment eventually leads her to want to end her parents' lives. Despite her frequent comments about killing her parents, but her friends considered it just a funny joke. Garrett crossed the street to his friend Tyler's house on Saturday, April 22nd, in 2006. He was excited to play, as the weather was pleasant. When he arrived at the Tyler's house, he noticed that the blinds were still closed, which seemed unusual. Even more unusual was that no one came to the door when he knocked. This surprised Garrett, as the Mark's car was parked in the driveway. Curious and hoping to find someone, Garrett peeked through the living room window but didn't see anyone. He then walked to the back of the house, towards the basement area where he often played with Tyler. As he looked through the window, he saw something strange on the floor, what appeared to be two people lying in a pool of blood. This disturbing discovery prompted Garrett to inform his mother. Garrett's mother seemed suspicious at first but decided to check on Tyler's family. They approached the house together, and Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman peeked inside and was met with a horrific sight, immediately prompting her to call emergency services. "There's been an incident at the Jasmine's house," she reported. The police swiftly arrived at the scene and forcibly entered the house through the front door. They then proceeded to the basement. Due to the severity of their injuries and the large amount of blood, the police initially struggled to identify the bodies. However, despite the difficulties, they were eventually able to confirm that the victims were Mark and Deborah, and tragically, they had lost their lives. The crime scene was exceptionally horrific, with blood splatters covering the floor, walls, and ceiling. Later, during a thorough search of the house, the police found a young child in the upstairs bedroom. The boy was lying in bed, surrounded by toys also splattered with blood, and had visible knife wounds. A young boy's throat had been severely cut. As police searched the house, they realized that the Mark and Deborah's eldest daughter, Jasmine, was missing. This raised concerns for her safety. Initial investigations suggested that the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room, with the rest of the house appearing untouched. The condition of the boy's body indicated that the crime likely took place the previous night. It seemed that the perpetrator had broken into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. But what had happened to Jasmine, and where was she? The police developed several theories to explain her disappearance. One possibility was that she had managed to escape and was somewhere safe. Another possibility was that the perpetrator had taken her and was harming her. However, as the investigation continued, no clear answers emerged. Detectives turned to the media for assistance in locating the missing girl. Jasmine, hoping she would reach out or someone would come forward with valuable information. The investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives and friends of Mark's family and their colleagues to gather more detailed information about their lives. They sought to determine if the family had any enemies who could be capable of such a heinous act. However, upon further investigation, they learned that Mark's family was well loved and had no enemies. They were a loving family with a strong marriage and positive relationships with their children, except for one exception, their eldest daughter, Jasmine, who had been causing trouble lately. As a result, the media announcements shifted focus. The investigation now sought to locate the eldest daughter, Jasmine, a very suspicious person. The girl may have information about the case or might have been involved in it. Under Canadian law, which prohibits publishing the names of minors, so news outlets started referring to Jasmine Richardson as JR because she was underage at the time. After news of her relationship with Jeremy spread, this couple has become a wanted person by the police. The police initially focused on their friends and acquaintances. However, this line of investigation was ultimately unsuccessful, and the investigation reached a dead end. Police investigation revealed some new information. A few hours after the crime, Jasmine and Jeremy were seen at a restaurant and a party hosted by a friend. A friend noticed that Jasmine was fine, showing no signs of distress or trauma, and she continued to socialize, drink, and have fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed and replied in a light-hearted manner. Jeremy and she took care of them. However, Jeremy's tone took a darker turn when he nodded in agreement, and then he added that he had cut them up like fish, implying a violent act had occurred. Jasmine's laughter downplayed the severity of the situation, making it seem less significant. The party guests burst out laughing, thinking that the remark was a sick joke. However, they did not realize that it was actually true. The guests' amusement was also verified by a comedian who was present. The police found a detailed plan in Jasmine's school locker, revealing her intentions to harm her family members with the help of her boyfriend. The photos of the suspects were widely circulated, and it is likely that they will be caught soon, as someone is expected to come forward with information about their whereabouts. Eventually, police received a tip and found Jasmine and Jeremy in Leader, Saskatchewan, about 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. They were found sleeping in a pickup truck and were taken into custody without a struggle. Jasmine and her boyfriend, Jeremy, were questioned individually, with Jasmine being interviewed first. She told investigators that she and Jeremy were deeply in love and that he reciprocated her feelings. However, their relationship was impacted by two main issues: a large age gap and disparate social status. Jasmine claimed that her parents would never have approved of their relationship. According to Jasmine, Jeremy ended the lives of her parents so that they could be together. When detectives inquired about her involvement in the crime, Jasmine denied being present at the time it occurred and stated she had no prior knowledge of the event. After she found out what had happened, she decided to run away with him because her love for Jeremy was so great. Detectives needed to identify the mastermind behind the plot. To get the suspect to cooperate, investigators came up with a clever tactic. They placed an undercover informant in Jeremy's cell, who successfully extracted information from him that contradicted Jasmine's claims. According to Jeremy, the plan to kill Jasmine's parents was actually she's idea. Jeremy was initially hesitant about going along with the plan. However, after realizing his own feelings for Jasmine, he agreed to it. Additionally, Jasmine's parents confiscating her computer as punishment also influenced his decision. Jeremy confessed to the informant. He took care of she parents, Deborah and Mark, while Jasmine took care of her younger brother, Tyler. Jeremy reveals that she desperately begged him to spare Tyler and come to her, and he was happy to get revenge on them all. Following Jeremy's confession, investigators questioned Jasmine using the recorded conversation between them and he as evidence, which left her no choice but to reveal every detail of the crime. She admitted that she stabbed her younger brother, Tyler, stating she didn't want to leave him behind as an orphan. In the following investigation, Jasmine and Jeremy voluntarily shared their social media profiles and passwords. By doing this, investigators were able to look at their private conversations and found thousands of messages that backed up Jeremy's previous claims. It became clear that Jasmine was indeed the mastermind behind the plan. Further investigation also uncovered a disturbing dynamic between Jasmine and Jeremy. Jeremy wrote that Jasmine was the only person who accepted and supported his unusual tastes, helping to alleviate the feelings of isolation he experienced due to not fitting in with societal norms. Fearing that he would lose her, he agreed to help carry out the horrific plan. One of Jeremy's messages contained a chilling passage, exposing his desire for violence. Jeremy wrote that he wanted revenge on Jasmine's parents and was determined to hold them accountable. His intention was to harm them and eventually make them disappear. Jeremy showed his affection for Jasmine in her time of need. However, his friends revealed a disturbing fact. Hours before the incident, Jeremy and his girlfriend had watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers. This movie tells the story of a couple who brutally murder 9 people. Jeremy's friends stated that after watching the film, he expressed a desire to reenact a similar scenario with his girlfriend, calling it the best love story of all time. Based on the evidence collected, including witness testimony in the suspect's confessions, Jasmine and Jeremy, detectives were able to reconstruct incidents surrounding the crime. This led to the suspects being charged with 3 homicide counts. Jeremy was intoxicated before the incident. Jasmine allowed him into the house and led him to the basement, where he assaulted Deborah, Jasmine's mother. Deborah received 12 stab wounds, with the most severe wound penetrating 12 centimeters into her chest and damaging her heart, which ultimately caused her death. Jeremy then brutally attacked Mark, Jasmine's father, inflicting 24 wounds, 9 of which were on his back. Mark also bled to death on the basement floor. Meanwhile, upstairs Jasmine stabbed her younger brother Tyler 5 times. Then, Jeremy joined her. He coldly slit the boy's throat. Jeremy returned home to clean the blood off himself, while Jasmine took a taxi to a restaurant where they had agreed to meet. Once reunited, they discussed the incident of the night and then went to a party. Jeremy's friend, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and evade authorities by fleeing to Saskatchewan. The brutality and gruesomeness of their actions are difficult to put into words. Jeremy and Jasmine committed their heinous crimes with ease and without emotion. What is even more disturbing is that during interrogation and detention, neither of them expressed any regret or remorse for their actions. While they were detained, Jeremy and Jasmine wrote letters to each other, referring to themselves as legendary and immortal. In one of these letters, Jeremy submitted a marriage proposal to Jasmine, one she happily accepted. Jasmine and Jeremy's intense relationship fell apart suddenly. As trial began, they blamed each other for their actions. Jasmine was the first to face trial in June 2007. She entered a not guilty plea, claiming that she was in a trance-like state at the time, which left her unable to intervene or stop Jeremy from killing her family. Jasmine also asserted that she only injured her younger brother, and Jeremy was the one who caused her younger brother's death. She made a statement that her conversations with Jeremy about killing her parents were just hypothetical discussions. But Jeremy took them seriously and pressured her into making them a reality. Jasmine received a 10 years prison sentence for 3 counts of homicide. However, due to Canadian laws regarding juvenile offenders, this was the maximum sentence she could receive, as she was under 14 years old at the time of the crime. The primary goal of the sentence was to focus on healing and restoring the girl's mental well-being, rather than punishing her. In a 10-prison sentence, including 4 years in a psychiatric facility. During her stay, doctors diagnosed her with 2 conditions: conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. Jasmine showed genuine remorse for her actions in the years leading up to her release, which was noted by medical professionals during her community supervision. After serving her full sentence, Jasmine was released from prison in 2016 and has since been living in Canada under a new, protected identity. Her return to society has been met with mixed opinions, with some people supporting her right to a second chance, while others believe her punishment should have been more severe. The community in Medicine Hat has made it clear they do not want her to return. It remains to be seen whether Jasmine has truly changed and grown during her time in detention. Jeremy's trial began in 2008. He claimed that he had not initially intended to harm his girlfriend's parents, Deborah and Mark. However, after being discovered in a basement, he felt forced to attack. Jeremy denied harming Tyler, and instead suggested that Jasmine was the one responsible. His defense argued that Jasmine had deliberately manipulated him into committing the crime, as she sought to escape her parents' strict control. Friends of Jeremy stated that he came to them before the crime. He confided in them his fear of losing Jasmine, to the point where he was willing to do anything to prevent it. Jeremy's lawyers asked the court to reduce the charges to manslaughter, suggesting that he was under the influence of substances at the time of the crime. When questioned by the prosecution about his motives, Jeremy gave an inconsistent response. He stated that when someone finds their soulmate, they will do whatever it takes to keep them. Throughout the trial, Jeremy remained largely unemotional, but broke down in tears when his mother, Jacqueline May, testified in his defense. Jacqueline felt guilty about the role she played in his upbringing, during which he was frequently physically and emotionally abused by her partners. In the end, Jeremy was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree homicide and received 3 life sentences. He will be eligible for parole in 25 years, starting in 2033. Casey Lancaster's charges related to being an accomplice in a crime have been dismissed in a Medicine Hat court. However, she was found guilty of obstructing justice. As a result, she received a 1-year sentence of house arrest and was prohibited from using drugs and alcohol during her custody. The case of Dalia DiPolito. On a warm afternoon in Bond Beach, Florida, a man named Muhammad walked into the police department to report a disturbing incident. He told the police that he had been approached by a woman named Delilah, who had asked him to commit murder. Muhammad claimed that Delilah had offered to hire him for this task, but he failed to provide her last name. Despite this crucial omission, the Bond Beach Police Department found Muhammad's story believable and decided to launch an investigation. The detective's task was to identify the mysterious Delilah and determine who her husband was. To gather more information, they decided to use Muhammad as bait to set up a meeting with Delilah. They chose the mobile gas station as the meeting location. As Muhammad said, Delilah lived nearby. At the mobile gas station, the detectives set up several surveillance vehicles to monitor the meeting. Before Delilah arrived, they briefed Muhammad on what to say to her. The detectives discreetly fitted Muhammad with a wire and recorder, allowing them to secretly record his conversation with Delilah as it happened. As the detectives kept watch on the mobile gas station, they focused on the exchange between Muhammad and a woman named Delilah. What struck the detectives as unusual was Delilah's appearance, which didn't fit the typical profile of someone seeking to have their husband killed. Clad in a skirt and tank top, she seemed quite attractive. Delilah got into the car with Muhammad. Muhammad expressed his disbelief that she was dragging him into a murder-for-hire plot. He asked her if it was worth getting someone killed, and Delilah confirmed that it was. Her reason was that she couldn't file for divorce because she feared her husband would retaliate against her if she tried to end their marriage and divide their assets. During their conversation, the woman openly admitted that she had planned to create an alibi for herself by going to a different location, such as Boca Raton, at the time of her husband's murder. When Muhammad asked if anyone would suspect her of involvement in her husband's death, she confidently replied that no one would suspect her. The detectives were stunned as they listened to Muhammad's conversation with the woman who was seeking to have her husband killed. They were particularly shocked by her casual and nonchalant attitude towards hiring a hitman to commit the murder. As they continued to listen, the woman even went as far as to show Muhammad pictures of her husband, providing him with a visual description of the intended target. The detectives were stunned by the woman's brazen lack of concern about the consequences of her actions. Her relaxed behavior and tone made it seem like she was discussing a routine business deal, not arranging for someone's murder. During the conversation, the woman made a shocking admission to Muhammad. She revealed that she planned to pay a deposit to a hitman to kill her husband. This admission was a major breakthrough for the detectives, as it confirmed their suspicions of soliciting murder. However, they knew they needed more evidence to build a stronger case. The woman suggested to Muhammad that she would withdraw $1,000 in cash and hand it over to the hitman at a later time. After completing her conversation with Muhammad about hiring someone to kill her husband, the woman got back into her vehicle and drove away from the mobile gas station. The detectives trailed behind her, gathering information about her residential address. Upon conducting a records check, they discovered that the address was actually registered under the name Dahlia Diao, not Delilah, as they had initially thought. Armed with this new information, the detectives investigated the vehicle Dahlia used to travel to the gas station, where she met with Muhammad. This led them to discover the registered owner's name, her husband, Mike Dew. To their friends, Mike and Dahlia seemed like a loving and happy couple. Mike and Dahlia met when Mike was bored at work and browsing the internet to pass the time. He stumbled upon a website offering escort services and decided to order one. Unbeknownst to him, this decision would alter his life forever. When the escort arrived, Mike was immediately captivated by her beauty. He thought she was stunning, and a spark developed between them instantly. They found themselves deeply engaged in friendly conversation over the next few days. Mike and Dahlia's friendship blossomed, and they spent an entire weekend together soon after. The time they shared was enjoyable, and they quickly realized that their connection went beyond friendship. From that moment on, Mike and Dahlia formed a committed partnership. A few months into their relationship, they stumbled upon an engagement ring store while browsing at a local jewelry shop, which sparked a conversation about marriage, a topic they had previously discussed. Mike became captivated by the idea of spending his life with Dahlia and decided to purchase a ring, symbolizing his commitment to their future together. Despite their relationship progressing rapidly, Mike felt deeply happy and in love. Prior to meeting Dahlia, Mike had served a prison sentence in 2001 for grand theft and fraudulent phone sales. He was convicted in Broward County, Florida, 2 years after the initial offenses. At the time, Mike was struggling with drug addiction and was in dire need of money, which he later acknowledged was no excuse for his actions. Mike received a 2-year prison sentence, accompanied by 28 years of probation. The court's intention behind this lengthy probation period was to give Mike sufficient time to repay his debt. However, upon his release, Mike was uncertain about how he would manage to do so. Determined to repay his debt, Mike landed a cooking job at a restaurant, earning $350 weekly, but it was far from enough to make a significant dent in the substantial amount he owed. He wanted a better financial situation to pay off his debt and secure his release from probation. A friend helped Mike transition from cooking to email marketing by offering him an office job just 4 blocks from his house. As Mike started dating Dahlia, he eventually opened up about his probation, informing her about the limitations of his situation, including the need for permission to leave the state. Dahlia expressed her desire to explore the world with Mike, but Mike's debt was a major obstacle. Dahlia then approached Mike with an offer to help him get out from under his debt, proposing that she give him $91,000 if he provided the remainder, which would allow them to clear the debt and embark on a travel-filled life that Dahlia longed for. At the time, Dahlia, a real estate agent, earned a good income. Her financial stability enabled her to help Mike clear his debt and restore his reputation. To resolve the situation, Mike consulted his attorney, who advised him to raise the required funds, promising that Mike would be cleared of his probation once he did so. Dahlia and Mike, following their attorney's guidance, agreed that the safest and most convenient approach would be for Dahlia to deposit the money into her Bank of America account. Since Mike had recently gotten married and was eager to settle his probation, he was thrilled when Dahlia informed him that she had wired the money to his attorney from her account. However, when Mike inquired about the transfer status, his attorney disappointingly told him that the funds had not yet been received from Dahlia. Mike grew increasingly worried and contacted his attorney again, only to be told that they still hadn't received anything. Dahlia claimed she had sent the money to the attorney, but couldn't explain the delay or why they hadn't gotten it. 2 days had passed since the transaction, yet the attorney remained empty-handed. Mike asked Dahlia to reveal where she had sent the funds, explaining he needed the receipt to double-check the transaction details. Dahlia, however, suspected that the attorney might have stolen the money. Meanwhile, Mike hoped to move past the misunderstanding with Dahlia. In the meantime, a supervisor from the Boone Beach Police Department reached out to Sergeant Whitey Jean, an undercover officer, for assistance. The detective briefed Sergeant Whitey Jean on the case, telling him that Dahlia was trying to hire someone to kill her husband. The detective asked Sergeant Whitey Jean to pretend to be the hitman and arrange a meeting with Dahlia. Sergeant Whitey Jean agreed to help and took on the role of the hitman. Pretending to be the hitman, Sergeant Whitey Jean contacted Dahlia and demanded $3,000 up front and the key to her house. The detective had requested the key as part of their plan to make Dahlia think the murder would happen at her home. However, Dahlia was unhappy with this and shared her concerns with Muhammad, the informant. During a phone call between Muhammad and Dahlia, a detective listened in and worried that they might have frightened her off. The detectives were concerned that Dahlia might now change her mind and find someone else to kill her husband. On August 3, 2009, Dahlia met with Sergeant Whitey Jean, an undercover detective posing as a hitman, in a CVS parking lot. However, Dahlia didn't bring the payment, so Sergeant Whitey Jean told her he wouldn't wait until after the murder to get paid. Instead, she needed to give him $7,000 in cash up front. Sergeant Whitey Jean suggested planning the fake hit for Wednesday morning, taking advantage of recent robberies in the area to make the assassination appear legitimate. He explained to Dahlia that he would stage a break-in and make it look like a burglary had occurred. He would then shoot Mike twice in the head to make it seem like a real crime. Sergeant Whitey Jean reassured Dahlia that he would wait a few days to contact her after the murder, knowing the police would be closely watching her in the aftermath of such a crime. During a conversation with Sergeant Whitey Jean, Dahlia had every opportunity to back down from the murder-for-hire plan, but instead, she confidently stated that she was 5,000% certain about her decision, indicating that her mind was made up and that she was fully committed to having her husband killed. Dahlia shared crucial information with Sergeant Whitey Jean about her husband's daily routine, revealing that Mike walked the dog at a specific time every morning and left the house unlocked. This information was key to her plan to deceive him and ensure the murder's success. She told Sergeant Whitey Jean that she would go to the gym at the time of the murder, ensuring she would be absent from the house while he entered. Sergeant Whitey Jean instructed Dahlia to go to the gym by 6 a.m. and informed her that he would enter her home at 6:30 a.m. Following the conversation, Sergeant Whitey Jean was shocked by Dahlia's apparent malicious intentions. Having dealt with many individuals in his work, the sergeant had never encountered anyone who exhibited the same level of cruelty as Dahlia. The detective thought it was crucial to stage a fake crime scene at Dahlia and Mike's home to gauge Dahlia's reaction on the day of the supposed hit, around 5:30 a.m. Dahlia told Mike she was going to the gym, which Mike found unusual since she had never gone that early before. However, he didn't think much of it and continued with his morning routine. The detective kept an eye on Dahlia to ensure she went to the gym and went inside, giving the necessary confirmation to proceed with their plan. Before setting up the fake crime scene, the detective needed to brief Mike about the situation. About 30 minutes after Dahlia left for the gym, a loud banging noise echoed through Mike and Dahlia's house, prompting Mike to rush to the door. When he opened it, he was shocked to find several police officers standing outside. Confused and alarmed, Mike asked what was happening. The detective stepped forward and revealed that his wife had allegedly hired someone to kill him, but the person was actually an undercover cop. The detective explained that the entire situation was a ruse designed to look like a real assassination attempt. Mike was left stunned when police officers appeared at his front door, revealing that his wife Dahlia had allegedly hired someone to kill him. Once the initial shock began to wear off, the detectives emphasized that time was critical and Mike needed to leave the premises right away. They then took him to the police station. Meanwhile, at Mike and Dahlia's home, detectives set up a fake crime scene, complete with crime scene tape and flashing police car lights to make it look like a serious crime had taken place there. When everything was in place, a detective contacted Dahlia, telling her that the police were at her house and needed to speak with her about an incident involving her husband. The detective asked Dahlia to return home for questioning. After speaking with the detective, Dahlia arrived back home to find her house cordoned off with crime scene tape and surrounded by police cars. She asked the detective what was happening and was told that they had received a report of a disturbance at her home, which included claims that shots had been fired. The detective then dropped the bombshell, telling Dahlia that a search of her house had supposedly uncovered the body of her husband, Mike. Dahlia was completely devastated by the news. She burst into tears as the reality of her husband's death finally hit her. The detective, who was no stranger to delivering bad news, thought Dahlia's reaction was unusual. Although she was clearly upset, he noticed that she wasn't actually crying. There were no tears at the police station. The detective started the interview by asking Dahlia about possible suspects in her husband's murder. His aim was to get her to admit that she had hired someone to kill him. He informed Dahlia that her husband had been shot twice in the head, watching her reaction closely. Dahlia believed that Mike would never open the door to a stranger. She explained that Mike was on probation for a stock fraud conviction and was struggling to get off probation. Dahlia claimed that the community was against Mike's release from probation because of his massive debt, and people were unsupportive. However, she insisted that their marriage was problem-free. Unaware that Mike was watching from another room, Dahlia was being interviewed by a detective. The detective told Dahlia they knew the truth about her husband's murder. Then, they brought in Sergeant Whitey Jean, who was handcuffed, and asked Dahlia if she knew him or had seen him before. Dahlia denied having any knowledge of or ever seeing Sergeant Whitey Jean. After Sergeant Whitey Jean was let out, the detective arrested Dahlia for soliciting murder. The detective revealed that the man Dahlia had hired to murder her husband was actually an undercover police officer. Dahlia was already in police custody when she was granted a meeting with her husband, Mike, the very person she had allegedly tried to have killed. When they faced each other, Dahlia attempted to beckon Mike over, but he refused to engage with her, making it clear that he couldn't help her out of this situation. What Mike really wanted was for Dahlia to own up to her attempt to have him killed, but she persisted in denying the allegations. The trial began on April 26, 2011, at the Palm Beach County Courthouse, where Dahlia faced charges of soliciting the murder of her husband, Mike. Mike testified against Dahlia, taking the stand for 3 days. Dahlia's defense team claimed that the plot to kill Mike was merely a publicity stunt for a reality TV show, and that Mike had actually masterminded the whole thing. However, Mike denied any involvement or knowledge of such a plan during his testimony. He insisted that he had no interest in appearing on a reality show, refuted Dahlia's claims, and emphasized that he would never risk his own safety or waste his money on such a scheme. After the defense and prosecution presented their cases, the jury began deliberating. Following several hours of careful consideration, they reached a verdict. Dahlia was found guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder with a firearm. The courtroom was filled with gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read aloud. Mike, who had attended the entire trial, felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was relieved that Dahlia would serve a 20-year prison sentence, which he considered a just outcome given the severity of her actions. On the other hand, Mike felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice had been served and he could finally move on with his life. However, Dahlia's attorneys appealed the verdict, arguing that the jury's decision was tainted by a juror's remark about Dahlia attempting to poison Mike's Starbucks drink. Although this claim was never presented as evidence during the trial, the appellate court ultimately reversed Dahlia's conviction, ruling that she was entitled to a new trial. Mike was shocked and dismayed that Dahlia would be given a second trial after being convicted of attempting to have him killed. As the state began its second trial in December 2016, it was confident in the evidence that showed Dahlia had solicited her husband's murder. However, to the state's disappointment, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, and the judge declared a mistrial. Undeterred, the state launched a third trial in June 2017. This time, the jury reached a verdict within 90 minutes, finding Dahlia guilty and sentencing her to 16 years in prison. In September 2019, the Florida Supreme Court rejected an appeal from Dahlia's defense team, which had requested a review of her 2017 conviction. Dahlia's defense team then attempted to take the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, but in February 2020, the court declined to hear it. Despite this setback, Dahlia's attorney remains determined to overturn her conviction. They plan to file a motion with a federal judge, alleging constitutional violations in the third trial. This, they believe, is their last chance to secure a new trial for Dahlia. Meanwhile, Dahlia has become a respected figure in prison due to her strong faith. She leads a Bible study group, which has earned her praise from fellow inmates. Before her imprisonment, Dahlia had a young son who regularly visits her. However, due to her circumstances, her son currently lives with his grandmother until Dahlia completes her sentence.